Thank you everyone for coming out this morning to do this sitting practice for the day. Just a quick note on what's going to happen and is happening. Lunch is being served, and right now the monks are going to eat, and they're going to get food and then come back to their spots while we are here. And then after the talk here, then we will eat. And we'll just go back through the little buffet table back there, and we'll grab plates and stuff, and it'll be time for lunch. Which is apropos, because that is the subject of the talk today is mindful eating, or eating with right-mindedness. So as we know that all of the life here on earth, we get our energy from the sun. So we're literally, physical manifestations of sunlight. But unlike plants, we can't convert that sunlight directly into energy. So you know that plants photosynthesize. The sunlight falls on their leaves, and then through chemical processes, they convert that into the glucose and whatever it is they need to stay alive. But humans and other animals don't have that capacity. And so we have to procure what we call food, and we have to put that food into our bodies. And we call that eating. And that is, of course, one of the most important things that we do. It's right up there with breathing oxygen and drinking water. And it is an interface between what we call ourselves and the physical environment. But despite this importance, how much time do we really spend thinking about the food we eat and eating food? Now, for our human ancestors, hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands, getting food, whether by hunting or gathering or farming, was not a preoccupation, but it was the occupation. It was what they did, and it occupied most of their time and energy. Some of them were hunting their food, like predator and prey. Some were gathering it from the ocean or lakes. But because we can't photosynthesize like plants, and because we don't produce all the vitamins and nutrients that we need, in some way we're going to have to take life and make that our own life. Now, we developed agriculture, and some people settled down in villages and cities, but that was really no less arduous in being a hunter or a gathering society. And that just led to new and improved forms of suffering, like infectious diseases and, unhealthy living conditions. But for us today, most people, but not all of them, food really isn't a concern like it has been. And it's been displaced pretty far down our scale of concern. I think a lot of people probably worry more about what's been said on some social media post than what they're going to eat or where it comes from. And on one hand, this is good, right? Because so much human suffering is the result of not having enough to eat or having to work too hard to get enough to eat. So for all of its ills, this agro-industrial complex we have, here in at least this country, is sort of a thing of marvel. But given the historical weight of food-centered concerns, it is sort of a strange state of affairs. Because even though we are so intimate with the food we eat, it literally becomes us. We, and not just the people sitting here, but sort of, everyone in the world, are often pretty disconnected from what we eat. So we don't know, what is it made from? Where does it come from? What are the ecological and the socio-political pipelines that bring this food to us? And how does our body even digest food? These aren't just trivial pursuit matters, or something that old hippies would think about, or health nuts, but the why, the what, and the how we eat speak directly to our lives as we, in the world, and tell us important things about what it is to be human and our responsibilities about being humans, whether those responsibilities are to ourselves, to each other, or to the natural world. So in Buddhism, which places great emphasis on looking closely at things, there's a great deal of importance placed on food and eating. So right before lunch then, the subject, and again as I've said, of this is mindful eating, or eating with right-mindedness. Mindful eating is approaching the acts of getting, procuring, preparing and eating food with samasati, which again is right-mindedness. Eating with samasati, in turn, means paying attention to what we're doing so that we reduce, at the very least, and eliminate, if possible, the dukkha associated with food. In this way, eating becomes an expression of awakening. And now these are some very complex questions that are wrapped up in this. And there's really a whole lot that could be said. But we really, it would be boring and impractical to go into all those details. So what I will speak on there are just 3 questions, again, that I've mentioned. We'll look at why do we eat, we'll look at what do we eat, and we'll ask the question, how do we eat? All of these from the perspective of eliminating, or at least reducing, the dukkha associated with food. So the first question, why do we eat? Now, on the face of it, this is simple enough. Because on the most basic level, we're just eating to sustain our life, to keep ourselves going, to get the energy we need, and that's it. There's the founder of what is called chado, or the Japanese tea ceremony, if you're familiar with that, a man by the name of Senrikyu. He said, food is sufficient if it satisfies hunger. And if you think about it, that's a pretty low bar, right? So you can eat any sort of gross food you find on the ground, but as long as it didn't kill you, it would keep you alive. It would satisfy your hunger. So it's sort of strange, but it's also true. Because we do eat to satisfy hunger, which is our body's way of telling us we're running empty, we're running out of energy. The early Buddhist Sangha had a similar attitude towards food. It was one of the 4 requisites needed to sustain life. And the other 3 were clothing, shelter, and medicine. But from that point of view, again, food was taken as just sustenance to sustain life and to practice the way of awakening. And this is a pretty deep teaching, I think. But we don't often think that way. Or at least maybe I don't. Because for those of us who've solved the problem of having enough food, or sufficient food to go around, and even some of the pre-modern humans were good at this, food and eating still remain as an item of significance. Why is this? First, because food just tastes good. It is a singular and a powerful source of pleasure for human beings. And second, human beings are social species, and so sharing food with each other is just something that we do. We enjoy eating together and being together. So now on top of this elemental function of food, just keeping us alive, we have several more answers to the question, why do we eat? Because now we can say, we eat because it feels good, because we enjoy it. And we all know this. We have our favorite foods. I like popcorn and Trader Joe's potato chips, those sorts of things. But here we get into trouble too. Because when we like something, we want more of it. And we know that more of it is desire, is attachment, it's craving, or it's tanha, which is the very definition of dukkha, or maybe one of the definitions of dukkha. And it isn't wrong to want to eat for pleasure, because we have these human bodies, and they're built to experience that. And in fact, some of the foods we eat, they have salt or sugar or fat, are designed to trigger these pleasure centers in our mind because we need those things to survive. And we don't really have to avoid those foods, but we do need to be careful with them. Because it's easy to eat too much, of course. Or, become attached to having certain food items in the cupboard or in the restaurant or whatever. Or being greedy and taking too much so that other people don't have enough. So in other words, enjoying food is not a problem, but we need to be careful that it doesn't create problems and lead to dukkha, whether it's for ourselves or others, or both for others and ourselves. So we often say, I like this. But saying I like this creates several problems. Because first, we're identifying with some preference. And so when we say I like this, we're reifying ourselves as a real self. Like there is this person called me. But we know in Buddhism, we learn from experience that this self isn't quite what we think it is. Maybe there's this relative self we call me, but what's at the center of that? Second, identifying as someone who likes this or doesn't like that can lead to trouble when we can't get that thing or get as much of it as we'd like. Because now I gets upset and gets angry, and we're like, who ate my leftover pizza from the refrigerator? Or why aren't my favorite potato chips on the shelf in the store? We've all maybe experienced this as well. And there's also the hindrance of greed that pops up to this. So we say, I like Oreo cookies a lot, so therefore I'd like a lot of cookies. And now I wants to get more than its share, which of course causes trouble with other people who would also like their share. So asking this question, why we eat, is important. Do we just eat to enjoy ourselves, to enjoy the company of others? Are we using food as a way to to assuage some sort of physical or emotional pain? And so we're maybe eating our desires instead of food? Now, we don't have to be so austere as to say, I'm just going to eat, the bare minimum to keep myself alive. But neither is it good to indulge our every pleasure when it comes to eating. So when we put our right-mindedness to practice, samasati, we become aware of these temptations because we're watching the mind and we know, I see greed or wanting more arising. I'm going to let that arise and pass away. And then I won't have taken too much. I won't have caused trouble. I won't have caused dukkha. And this, practicing this way, we learn to eat with dignity, as Buddha would have. Okay. So for whatever reason we are eating, why do we eat? Maybe an even bigger question is, what do we eat? What should I eat? And this has been a problem for people as long as there have been people to have this problem. If any of you are familiar with the author Michael Pollan, in his book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, he calls this the question of what should I have for dinner tonight? For much of history, this wasn't much of a question. You ate what you could hunt or fish or gather or barter or probably even steal. As kids, we just eat what our parents put on our plate. For bhikkhus and bhikkhunis in the early Buddhist Sangha, and even now, they eat what's offered. But for us, living in this relatively affluent land, this can be a really complicated question. And one of the reasons it's complicated is that there's a lot of dukkha involved and bound up in getting and eating food. Like the suffering, the craving, the dukkha that we experience when we want certain foods, sweet foods or salty foods. This issue is fundamental to being human. Because again, our bodies only get energy, we can't get energy directly from the sun, like plants, so the rest of us have to find a way to get the bodies of other living things into our own bodies. And then our internal chemistry can generate the energy we need. To do this, of course, requires that we grow or catch these things, and then we kill them. And in Buddhism, our commitment to non-harming, or ahimsa, asks that we refrain from killing others or harming them. The first of the 5 precepts. Or causing others to do so. So we're in a real pickle here as far as that goes. And so to address this issue, many who practice Buddhism refrain from eating meat and other animal products. And I bet that if you were to ask people on the street who weren't Buddhist, they would think that is the way, that all Buddhists would follow, to not eat meat. But while many temples and practice centers will serve vegetarian food, I don't know that there's any specific requirement that one be vegetarian. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that there is. And as for the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, the question of whether or not he ate meat or permitted the Sangha to eat meat is really a minefield. There's a lot of opinions and scholarship and thinking on this. And if you're bored sometime, look it up and you'll find yourself going down lots of rabbit holes. There are many arguments, good arguments on either side. Some of them very academic and some of them drawing on our compassion and empathy. And it seems the only thing for sure is the question probably will not be settled anytime soon. So we have to rely on our own right-mindedness to figure this question out for ourselves, asking, what is the path of least dukkha when I eat? And determine for ourselves how much pain and distress we want to be inflicted on others in order that we ourselves may live. Because one thing is certain, There's no way to avoid causing dukkha to someone or something somewhere to keep ourselves fed. Animals are killed and dismembered, hopefully in that order, but not always in these slaughterhouses. Large-scale farming, we know, harms the environment very seriously and exploits the workers who work on those farms. And even backyard vegetable gardening can cause trouble. When you dig up the earth, there's like 6 worms you've cut in half, and you're just trying to grow beans in your backyard. So all of this involves pain and suffering. Now, a lot of people don't care. They just want their steak or their chicken nuggets on their table, and whatever. It's not my problem. I've got what I want. But for those of us who practice the Buddha way, we do care, and we have to care. We have to engage right-mindedness to figure these questions out. Because not only are we committed to liberating ourselves from dukkha, but we're aiming to liberate all beings from dukkha. Where here being is understood as broadly as possible, whether it's a plant, an animal, a fish, an insect, or maybe even little microbes in the soil. Now, speaking of that, there's just a few stories I'd like to share from what I'm calling the front lines of figuring out what to eat. When I first started practicing, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to be Buddhist. I'm supposed to be vegetarian. And for many years, I was a strict vegetarian. I didn't eat any animal products, not even Jell-O or marshmallows, which are derived from animal collagen. And there are certain pink food colorings that are derived from insects, which is kind of gross anyways. But if I'd see that, nope, that's animal products. Now, in Japanese Zen, which what I was practicing, I'd read somewhere that anything down to the level of shellfish, so like scallops or clams or whatever, was considered sentient. But anything below that was not sentient. And so then you could eat shellfish. But I didn't really like shellfish. And it seemed to me like trying to find a loophole for something, to make my preference fit with some other teaching. And so I didn't eat, anything that wasn't a plant or plant-based, it's like, no. Now, I'm not quite so strict now because I started to have some adverse health effects related to that diet. But in general, I think it's good to avoid animal products. But one thing I discovered by being vegetarian in a non-vegetarian world, which the United States is that even trying to reduce dukkha by adopting some certain lifestyle or diet can cause dukkha. That's the first noble truth. Dukkha is. So as much as I valued being vegetarian, I found it was more important to not be attached to it. So I would never want to inflict my own choices on someone else. There are some people that will go on food trips, like I'm this way or that way, but I didn't think that was a good idea. So I never made a big deal, really, out of being vegetarian. And so if I went somewhere and they were serving meat, that's what was for lunch or dinner, and that's what I was going to have. But sometimes problems would occur anyways. So I remember once I was driving up to this place called Rimonji Monastery, Zen Monastery, and it's way up in northeast Iowa in the middle of nowhere, 10 miles north of Decorah. And I was driving with my friend Mary. We were going up to some celebration they were having. This was a long time ago, I think 2004 maybe. And we stopped at this cute little diner on the way in this small town. And I thought, well, here we are in Iowa, there's nothing vegetarian. That's fine. I'll eat salad and french fries and be totally happy. But we looked at the menu, and my friend Mary says, look, Chris, they have a garden burger. Like, oh, cool, a vegetarian hamburger. How progressive, for this little Iowa town. And so I ordered the garden burger, and I take a bite, and I'm like, wow, this is just like a hamburger. And it turns out that's because it was actually a hamburger. So garden burger on that menu meant a hamburger with lettuce and tomatoes and onions. But I'm like, okay, I'd been vegetarian for over a year at that point, and so I was more than happy to have a little hamburger back in my life. It's what they brought, and I wasn't going to make a big deal. But my friend Mary, bless her heart, she called the server over. And she says, oh, now you should know, Chris is vegetarian and he doesn't eat meat. You should make clear what what garden burger means, and you got to bring him something else. And made this big whole, for me, very embarrassing scene, because I was quite happy to have this hamburger. I didn't want to make my choice someone else's problem. And they eventually took it back, and they brought me the salad and french fries, and they gave it to me on the house. I was just very embarrassed by this. And I did leave them a tip, though. I tipped them the cost of the hamburger plus a little more for the the embarrassment that person had to suffer too. But even if you're not going to go on your own food trip, someone else might want to take one for you. Now, a couple of weeks after that, I had gone up to visit my brother in Rochester, Minnesota. And we went to a barbecue for the 4th of July at one of his friends' houses. And when we got there, my brother says, "Oh, look, I brought these Boca burgers, veggie burgers, so they can cook them for you." I'm like, well, that's nice. But I thought, uh-oh, here we go again. Something embarrassing is going to happen. And so when they started cooking, the hostess brought me 2 veggie burgers. And she said, "Oh, I made sure these weren't cooked anywhere near the regular hamburgers." And I thought, oh, well, thank you so much. But again, I'm just kind of embarrassed. Like my choice is becoming something you have to deal with now. And here I was just going to eat whatever, crazy Midwestern salads and baked beans they had out. Anyways, so I ate my 2 veggie burgers. And then a little later, they brought me another one. I'm like, well, okay, I can eat 3. And the party went on. And then they brought me another one. And I think, good grief, because now I've eaten all 4 of these veggie burgers, the whole box. And I feel terrible, not just because they had to do this for me, but because I've eaten so much food. Those are, with buns and everything, that's a substantial amount of food there. So again, dukkha is. And even if we made a choice to try to reduce that dukkha, it's, still things can pop up. And these are just things we need to think about, when we eat with right-mindedness. How are my choices perhaps going to affect someone else? So our final question then, we've asked, what should we eat? And why should we eat? The final question is, how should we eat? And this one might be the most easily answered. So by, saying, how should I eat? I'm talking about physically taking food and putting it into our mouth. And, some of the decorum that surrounds that. How do we eat physically, and how do we eat, as a matter of, manners or culture. So in terms of mindful eating, or eating with right-mindedness, sometimes we're taught that we should eat really slowly, with full awareness. So we pick up our food or put it on our fork very slowly. And we bring it up to our mouth very slowly, all the while watching, every detail what we're doing. We're being very attentive to what we're doing. We put it into our mouth slowly and chew slowly. And sometimes I've read that, people say, chew your food 100 times in mindfulness. And we do that, not just as an exercise of tedium, but so we are tuning in to what's happening. We can watch the arising and passing away of these sensations. I'm tasting now, and now it's gone. What I thought was a great taste is going to pass away. I'm not going to be attached to this taste. These sorts of things. And this is pretty good advice, really, because a lot of times we can just shovel food into our mouths and not pay attention to what we're doing. But when we're not paying attention as we eat, not only are we missing that as a moment of awakening, but we're also taking for granted all of the drama and the labor that went into bringing us that food. So to eat mindfully, both so we can tune in to the rise and fall of experience and gain insight into that way, but also as an expression of the appreciation for the labors and for the food. Now, we can do this easily in a retreat environment like this. And in the Vinaya texts and in some of the Mahayana regulations for temples, there are long lists of things that, we should and should not do as we eat. And so they'll say things like not to eat with your mouth open, or to smack your lips, or to play with your food, or to try to take food from someone else's bowl, which is sort of funny, but, these rules arose in response to things that were happening. So if we think about this, in terms of certain cultural parameters, we might call this just using good table manners. But how do we maintain this when we're not in a retreat environment? Because we'll leave here at 5 o'clock this evening and then go eat at home today or tomorrow. So how can we bring this right-mindedness to every time we eat? So, we're at home or with friends or at a movie theater eating popcorn. So here's a story that can shed some light on that. And this comes from the Korean Zen tradition, actually. There was a very famous Korean Zen master named Seng Son. He came here in the 1970s sometimes. And So they're one of his temples or practice centers in the morning, and a student spies Sengsan eating breakfast and reading the morning newspaper. And he says, "Sunim," which is the Korean equivalent of Bante, "you always teach us to focus on just one thing at a time. So why am I seeing you eating and reading that newspaper?" And now this student probably thought they were clever, right? Like, gotcha. But the Zen master, without missing a beat, Sengsan says, when you eat and read a newspaper, just eat and read the newspaper. So what he was showing this person is that mindfulness or mindedness is not just tuning into the micro details of what we're doing, but also meaning a very big and broad presence of mind. So we know what we're doing when we're doing it. So if we're eating and reading a newspaper, we know that we're eating and reading that newspaper. If we're eating and doom scrolling the news on our phone, we know we're doing that. And when we engage the question of how do we eat in this way, we're more easily able to take these important teachings out of our retreat experience and bring them to bear in every moment of daily life. So we don't have to wait to be here on a day of mindfulness to eat with mindfulness. Every moment that we eat can be an expression of awakening. So the aim of Buddha's practice is to eliminate dukkha. First, becoming aware of how it arises, and second, working to eliminate the tendencies in our mind that allow it to be created in the first place. Food and eating are fundamental to being human and to being alive, and they can bring us great joy, but they also have the power to bring us and others, lots of suffering, lots of dukkha. So if we can learn to bring to bear this power of samasati, right-mindedness, we can make our lives easier, and we can make the lives of others easier. And overall, we can make this saha world, or this world of struggle, a better place to be. So thank you for listening. And now we will go and we'll eat lunch. There are tables in back or out there in the lobby where we can eat. And as we eat, again, bear in mind, this practice of samasati, and bear in mind the practice of noble silence, during the time we eat and throughout the rest of the day. So, thank you.